So, hello everyone, and welcome to Debra and Peter Are Doing a Podcast with Deborah Alcott-Tyler, the Chief Executive of the Directory of Social Change, and Peter Wanless, the Chair of the Five Rights Foundation, President of Somerset County Cricket Club, and various other bits and pieces. No, I no longer need to be introduced as formally this or formally that, which is nice. Yeah, feeling good. How are you, Deborah?
I'm all right, thank you. Quick shout out. Our normal podcast producer, Jose's on leave. And so we've got his boss, Justin, standing in for him today. So we shall see. We'll report back, Justin, as to whether you're doing a good enough job. I'm all right, Peter. I'm warm, which I don't mind the heat. I actually love this weather. But my poor dog, Arthur, absolutely loathes it. So he's even panting in his sleep, bless him. Yeah, so other than that, I'm good.
Yeah, Bungle the cat is suffering a bit as well. He's talking a lot. I think he's trying to say, I'm extremely hot. Can you do something about this? Yes. But I'm not really sure. And he's just kind of flaked out. But I'm in my beautifully air-conditioned home office, which I get very smug about at this time of year and during periods of weather of this kind. And I will miss the air conditioning very much when we move house. But at least for now, it's good.
Yeah, it's a real challenge trying to cool Arthur down because he gained a fear of water as a very young puppy. You know, long caught in a torrential rainstorm was all, and so we can't even hose him down. We tried buying him a little doggy paddling pool. You know, took one look at it and ran away. Like even if we get the hose out in the garden to water the plants or anything, if that's still allowed. If it's not allowed, I haven't been doing it. Anyway, he legs it inside the house and gets as far away as he possibly can from the hose. So it's like almost. So at the moment, he's laid on the sofa and I've aimed the fan at him. Anyway, what's been tickling your brain, Peter?
Well, I had a really interesting experience where I was fiddling around yesterday with found some old cassette tapes, and on one side was
for the younger listeners, cassette tapes were precursors to CD, which were precursors to streaming. The younger listeners might not know what they are. Peter.
Cassettes. I've still got a fair few cassettes, and I have this little cassette player which you can link through Bluetooth to a speaker and play your old cassettes. And I found this cassette, and it had a concert on it by the Wanless family for my granddad's birthday in 1975.
Wow.
And I vaguely remembered the concert, which includes Peter and Mummy doing a duet on the piano, and Brother Graham doing some reading about Jack and John and Jill or something or other. But the tape is stretched a bit and it doesn't sound really good. But I discovered on the other side is my granddad's response to this birthday concert, and it's perfectly preserved. And so I have a few recordings of my granddad, but it felt really special to hear him talking in 1975 about how grateful he was to receive this cassette. And he reads out his birthday cards and the messages in them. And then he hands over to my nan. Now, I haven't heard my nan's voice since she died in 1997. And it was amazing. And in the space of 2 or 3 minutes of my nan talking, some real kind of fundamental characteristics of her personality came through. So not only was it amazing to hear her voice, but I heard through her words the essence of her character, and also the essence of my Auntie Gertie's character, who was a larger than life figure in our family. And so my nan talks about how Auntie Gertie uses the timer switch to great effect on her cooker, and then sort of goes off on one about how Auntie Gertie cooks her vegetables in an enormous amount of water without quite the finesse some of us would apply. And I thought, this is just so my Nan was the perfectionist who's an amazing cook, but was incredibly diligent about everything. And you can almost hear the sort of frustration in her voice that this rather kind of, by and large, Auntie Gertie boils up her vegetables in gallons and gallons of water, and yet they taste as good as my Nan's. And it was just the power of the spoken word, I suppose, and the character which I got from these sentences. So I kind of, and it made me think
about Alistair. Can I just tell you quickly, my grandmother, so my grandmother was mixed race Anglo-Indian, born in northern India, as was my mum, and several of her siblings also born in India. And but she recorded her life story towards the end of her life, and it's just incredible. So it's all the story is about her life in India, growing up. Her father went blind. Her mum and dad. Her dad was Anglo-Indian. Her mum was Anglo. I mean, she was actually French-Irish, but anyway, they got married. Both their families cut them off because this was considered, as you can imagine, back then, a really dreadful thing to do.
Yeah,
this would have been the early 1900s, and so they kind of lived as outcasts, and also being mixed race, Anglo-Indian, all the rest of it. So it's absolutely fascinating. And hearing her voice is just, I know exactly what you mean. And also because she spoke English beautifully, but she kind of like put the emphasis on different vowels. So my mother is Louise, for example, and my grandmother would call her Louise. Like she'd emphasize a different thing, and like loads of words remind her. But language, Peter, it means so much. It's like how we say things and what we use. This is what this is making me think of. And I know we've spoken about this before, but again, it's driving me absolutely up the bloody wall. This constant reference to the government having U-turns. And it's so misleading, because that's absolutely not what's happening. None of the decisions that the government has made have they completely reversed. None of them. They're still going, yes. Well, I can't think of any. They're still going to means test the winter fuel allowance. They've just raised the threshold. They may do some stuff. They're amending like mad the PIP stuff in the welfare bill that's going through, but they haven't said we're not going to touch PIP. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I also think like you'll often find the media will say like, the Prime Minister or the Minister admitted that. And of course, the whole use of that word admit implies wrongdoing somehow. Not that they said or they clarified, but they admitted that. And it's getting me really cross. And it's that sort of thing that polarizes people, because you hear those words, it triggers all sorts of unconscious thought processes in your brain. And before you know where you are, we've got all of us falling out with each other because we've been manipulated by very clever use of words. Anyway, I don't know what you think about that, but that's my rant.
Okay, well, I'm a bit more cynical than that, so I think we could have a good argument about this. I think it could be argued that politicians say one set of things to become leader, they say a second set of things to be elected, and they say a third set of things to govern. And equally, politicians who govern say one set of things when they're in charge of the country, and they say another set of things when they no longer have the responsibility to keep the show on the road and can oppose. And I think that in all of that, there is some absolutely deliberate, calculated U-turning in order to acquire power and then come to terms with the realities of having to deliver against those responsibilities, and that makes people cynical as well. So
I think there's a degree of truth in that, but there's also, Peter, as you will know, normal parliamentary behaviour. So all of that is true. We all know that, every single one, because you've got to win people over, and because people, on the whole, don't have time in their everyday lives to look into the in-depth of stuff. So they do fall for sound bites and things like that. And, intelligent people use that. But there is the point that the negative message about leadership, Mark Sim, who's the interim chair of the Charity Commission and chief executive of P3, he did a very interesting post on LinkedIn where he was talking about leadership. And he was saying powerful leadership, you pose an idea or you put something out there, you think it's all worked up and it's perfect, and then you stick it on the ground and you suddenly discover it doesn't work, and you've got to go back to the drawing board and you've got to rethink. Or something you thought would go swimmingly past all of your board or all your staff would be super happy about it, you discover that actually you've missed something. So good leadership is about constantly changing direction. It's about constantly making different decisions, responding to the environment, getting the feedback and all the rest of it. And the cynicism about the politics, I think, is wearing, because what it does is it causes exactly those, kind of polarized positions between us. So you could also argue that what's happened here, and you may well have done, you probably remember more than me because you've been more involved in it, but I can't think of any bills that have been set before Parliament that hasn't caused an amendment or somebody to say they're not going to vote for it, or, and they also label it rebellion. Like this, as far as I was aware, is a free vote. They haven't been whipped, as far as I'm aware, for this particular vote this week on the welfare bill. And so therefore, if MPs choose not to support it, why is that a rebellion? That's a free vote. It's only a rebellion if you've been explicitly given a 3-line whip and told you must vote this way.
Wow.
And then they don't. And as far as I'm aware, they haven't been given that.
Oh, well, no, I don't think you're quite right there.
Okay, I'm happy to be corrected.
And it's extremely rare for government to bring forward a piece of legislation and at second reading, which is the first time that Parliament has a chance to discuss the entirety of a piece of legislation, you have large numbers of the governing party putting down an amendment to throw out the entire piece of legislation. So that isn't that I think that is materially different from the scrutiny which legislation rightly receives once it gets past second reading and goes into committee stage, and then that's Parliament at its best. That's when politicians engage, scrutinise, test the legislation, make amendments. As you say, it's as rare to have a piece of legislation that sails through Parliament without any amendments at all as it is to have a piece of legislation which large numbers of the governing party want to throw out even before it's been agreed to be considered in Parliament. So I do think that there's something materially different about the nature and the scale of the rebellion against this fundamental piece of Labour legislation, which was in the Queen's speech, which marks out from the testing of more detailed pieces. So I kind of don't agree with you, but and I also think that isn't leadership about standing for something and having some clear principles and direction. So if you develop a reputation for saying one thing, and then as soon as lots of people say, well, we don't really like that, you say, oh, well, that isn't really what I meant. I actually meant something different. Or, oh, no, you've got a good point there. Then it is quite hard to bring a country or an organisation with Peter,
you. That happens all the time. I mean, Boris Johnson, every 5 bloody minutes said one thing, then said another thing, changed his mind, lied outright, got caught out in a lie, denied he lied. We see that all the time. So I get the broader point, and I absolutely agree with you about there is definitely a lack of a clear vision. Like, I've got no sense of what the hope is and what the dream is for the country under this government. But that for me is a separate issue to the use of language. In other words, implying things or the way in which you describe things. I mean, I think, for example, how often the media talked about a man having sex with an underage girl, because that minimises it. It's actually the rape of a child.
Yes.
But that implies that it was just, it was some 15-year-old marching about in a miniskirt with big red lipstick. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and I just think we've got to catch these things out. So fine, by all means criticise the government for making bad decisions, but just don't call a thing something that it isn't. And so I don't, unless they completely pull the bill. Which even now all they're doing is making concessions. So unless they completely pull the bill, it's not a U-turn, it's an adjustment. And you can disagree with it. You can say they're wrong to do that. He should have just pushed it through regardless. But you see what I mean? It's like, I'm sure our wonderful listener, Simon Lancaster, will probably agree that words make such a powerful difference to this. It's the subliminal thinking that we have. So all of this language of U-turn, U-turn, U-turn with this government, it basically is building up that mistrust that you've just talked about. And that's not all to do with the actions of the government. Some of us, they've been very naive and they've, blundered about for sure in this first year of leadership. But the whole tone of the way in which they are spoken about, decisions are spoken about, uses language like admitted or U-turn or... Do you know what I mean? And I do.
I think, I was wanted to make a general point rather than a specific point. Yeah. I do think specifically Keir Starmer has a problem because in order to be elected as the Labour leader, he said a number of things, almost none of which are now government policy. And in order to, and in setting out what the government is now going to do, quite a few of the things that they're doing are being adjusted. Now, what is the difference between learning intelligently as you go and debating and discussing that? I agree, that is a healthy thing, and being clear about the principles that you stand for, and that's something I think they do need to work a bit harder on. But if we take it to being a charity leader or leading an organization or whatever, then it is a sign of strength, I would agree, to be able to listen and learn and moderate one's opinion rather than sticking absolutely to the first thing that you thought of. And that is challenging. One of the hardest things that I experienced at the NSPCC was a major consultation that we had with significant numbers of staff and volunteers about how Childline should be configured. And we went into the consultation with the best of intent and thought we had a clear idea of what we wanted and needed to do, and were being respectful to volunteers by saying, when we get these various pieces sorted out, then there'll be lots of opportunity for you to do the things which will work for you. But that wasn't what they heard. It wasn't what they thought. They felt they had been ignored. They thought that the staff were trying to configure things to their own benefit, and they weren't being engaged. And in the end, despite intellectually being able to sort of plot a way through, I did pull the consultation because it was it wasn't commanding support, and that was tricky because some of the staff who'd been consulted on these proposals thought they were great, because they had sort of positive changes in the organisation, or they were already half spending their redundancy, which they were going to get as a consequence of these changes. So although we say formally this is a period of consultation, there's a sort of expectation, the top brass, they know what they're going to do, they've made their decisions already. And when you actually take a breath and say, do you know what, you're right, this isn't as well thought through as we think, we'll go away and regroup. As I say, as a leader, that was a really hard thing to do, and it felt unnatural. It was definitely the right thing to do. And I think there would have been mixed feelings about if I was a strong and effective leader and that was a sign of wisdom, or someone who couldn't hold on to their principles. So it's but it isn't easy to change your mind, is it?
No, it's not. Well, because ego, we've all got ego, and it's okay, it's healthy to have ego, but sometimes that ego gets in the way because you don't want to look weak, you don't want to look indecisive and all those things. No, I think you're completely right, Peter, and I think that is why leaders sometimes get stuck in things. But the other thing is that sometimes staff get stuck in whatever you do, they're not going to like it anyway. They've made their mind up. So I think you can't always win people over. There's a seminal publication called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, which is like a big piece of psychological research into why people do nutty things in crowds, why normal, people who would never behave like that individually or in a small group when they're part of a mob mentality. And there's the wonderful story about the group who believed in aliens and thought the aliens were going to come and rescue. It was like a cult thing, and that aliens were going to come and rescue them on Christmas Eve or something. I can't remember the detail of the story. And they all gathered together and, praying together, waiting for the aliens to come and take them off the planet because they'd been praying and all the rest of it. And of course, the aliens never turned up. And this study looked at what happened to those people when the thing they really thought was going to happen, they were absolutely convinced didn't happen. Did they suddenly then question their belief? And all that happened was they said, no, we didn't get picked up because our prayers worked. The world is now a better place, So in other words, people absolutely find a way to convince themselves. Now, I've had that myself at DSC, where I've made decisions that, I've thought, they're absolutely necessary decisions, but no amount of explaining or trying to get people alongside would shift some individuals who decided that's not the right decision. I don't agree with it, and then they never let it go. Bless them. So
well, it's definitely
you're right.
I mean, leadership is definitely not pleasing all the people all the
No.
time, or pleasing as many people as possible,
Yeah.
is it? It's achieving the optimal impact
Yeah.
with the resource.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, don't go into being a charity leader if you want to be popular and have everyone
No,
love you.
absolutely not. Yeah, because that's not the case at all. And I think it's easier in a smaller organisation like mine, because I know my staff really well and I've got to know them over time and I've been around a long time. So on the whole, I think, they know that I do try and keep my word. And the times when I haven't, I've told them I haven't, and I've owned up and said what's gone wrong. So I think it's slightly easier to maintain that and make tough decisions.
Yeah, I don't
much
know.
harder for an organisation the size of the NSPCC, Peter, I suggest, where you've got thousands of staff who don't know you particularly well.
Well, I don't know. If you know people really well, is there a risk that you get more emotionally associated and connected with their broader motivations, and that makes it all the more difficult to kind of step back and dispassionately but appropriately do the right thing for the cause?
We have very robust challenging mechanisms at DSC, I'd say. So, for example, there was a decision I wanted to make last year that I was absolutely sure was the right decision. I said, I really think we should push this through. And there was a lot of fight back. And in the end, I said, okay, fine, you're right. Let's try it. Well, I don't know that you're right, but I hear it. Let's do it your way. And, let's make it work, sort of thing. So, I think that, and there's pros and cons in everything, isn't there? So, yeah.
I think I've talked before about a major piece of 360 feedback I did on my leadership after about sort of 4 or 5 years at the NSPCC, where some people said that they wanted me to move faster and take more decisions quickly, and some people said they wanted me to be more inclusive and involving of people in the decisions, and the easiest thing is to just say, well, I can't do both of those things, so I'll carry on operating in the way I was. But where we got to was a position where, with a certain set of people at different levels and positions in the organization, we had a conversation about it's really important this organization moves with pace. It's really important this organization moves with engagement. What this organization shouldn't do is equivocate unnecessarily when we're not sure. So your job is to ask me in various situations where I'm performing, are you equivocating? Have you got the right balance between pace and engagement? And that was really useful, because it created a kind of currency to help people who wanted us to move faster to see that actually there might be a case for bringing a few more people with us, so we don't break this precious and complicated thing, which is the NSPCC and its very strange mix of staff, volunteers and supporters. But at the same time, if we get bogged down in talking to everyone, we're not moving forward fast enough. So pace with engagement, but not equivocation, worked well for me.
It's interesting though, because I again, coming back to this whole point about language and use of language, and I've seen many a conversation scuppered by how it's framed. So, for example, at DSC now, I may have told you about this before, I'm not sure, but at DSC now, we never ever ask our board to agree with a course of action. We ask them to align, because what I've discovered over my many years is that if you ask people what their opinions are, they'll tell you. And some of them will be very polarized opinions. The trouble is that if you want to go down one particular route, you're having to ask somebody to change their mind or say they were wrong. And that, for every human being, me, you, all of us, that's really, really difficult to do, because they've got to say, okay, I now agree with you, I've changed my mind. And there are people who can do that, but it's rare. So we talk about aligning, because people can align behind the group and its direction of travel without necessarily having to say, okay, I was wrong, I've changed my mind. And I've found that the use of that word, align instead of agree, has opened up all sorts of conversations that had otherwise been completely stuck like that. So I think the way you frame a question, the words you use, like really, really thinking through, and I do a lot of that. And it always sounds to people as if I'm very spontaneous. But this is years of me really thinking hard, really prepping for speeches, really prepping when I lead meetings, really thinking about what I'm going to say. So now it comes more naturally, because I've done so much work on it over the years, but I never go into anything without thinking very carefully, what words am I going to use and how am I going to use them and things like that, because I know it makes such a massive difference. It's like swearing, Peter.
So,
there's shed loads of research that says people who swear in a non-offensive way, but people who swear like in the course of their conversation are generally more trusted. So swearing at somebody, never acceptable, but saying, oh my God, that's a pile of shit, that's okay, if you know what I mean, if you're not swearing at somebody. So yeah, interesting. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say about alignment. I think that is great advice for the Labour Chief Whip, and that what Labour hasn't had is sufficient alignment around the strategic objective that is welfare reform. And as a consequence, there's been a choice of take it or leave it.
Yeah, it's been binary. You're right.
All the bill or not all the bill, as opposed to here's the strategic direction of what we're seeking to achieve. Here are some of the variables. Where does our alignment start and stop? Now they've got a real problem if they, with a majority of 160, they haven't got a majority of one to amend the welfare system to rebalance between entitlements and availability for work, or whatever these things might be. So that's alignment. I like it.
Yeah, well, it really does work. Really does work. I could carry on banging on about this for hours and hours and hours, Peter. But I'm, very conscious. I don't know. You're sitting in a lovely air-conditioned office. I've got a dog going panting desperately at me. I think, and it's the Monday morning quarterback. It's very easy for you and I to sit here and criticise the way the Labour Party is running itself, the way the government's making decisions. But one hopes that there is somebody listening who thinks actually so much of it is about framing, about language, about you can make really difficult decisions and they still be unpopular, but you can frame them in a way that doesn't make people think you're an arse or a liar or an idiot, but just that you've made a choice that they wouldn't have made. And I just wish they would think more cleverly about how they communicate with each other. Anyway, Justin is waving at us.
Yes.
Peter, saying, get off. Your time is up. Come in number 7. Your time is up.
And that's fine. I shall return to my book. I'm reading a very interesting biography of JF Kennedy. John F. Kennedy at the moment.
I'm reading The Art of Delivery that you recommended.
Oh yeah. No,
very good.
That is good. Though it does go on a bit about cabinet committees looking at this, that, and the other, and I am left at the end of it wondering if it was so successful in some respects, why within a year John Reid arrived at the Home Office and said that the whole department wasn't fit for purpose.
I know.
So it does raise some questions as well as answers, but they were great times, and I did recognise one stocktake meeting with the Prime Minister about education on about page, I can't remember, 268. And I thought, that was
I remember
me.
that. Brilliant. Well, I should look out for clues to you, Peter.
Great.
Okay. All right, listeners.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Do email in with your own opinions because we're very interested. And as you hear, Peter and I don't always agree. We're all the better for it. Bye, everyone.
Very good. See you next time. Bye.